Welcome to the Voice of MPE, the official podcast of Merchant Payments Ecosystem, Europe's largest merchant payments conference. Today, we are at the 16th Annual MPE Conference, MPE 2023. This podcast brings you interviews with payment industry leaders and professionals from the entire payment world. For more information, head over to www.merchantpaymentsecosystem.com. Today, we discuss how quantum computing will disrupt fraud detection. Helen Owen from Antaria, the moderator of this session, spoke with Nathan Trosdell from Fraudio, Nakio Shishkov from Netcetera, Quintin Stephen from Gaiseki and Devrient, Andre Muller from Ellie, and Catherine Malik from Assertify. Learn more about the latest trends and innovations from merchant payments fraud prevention.
What we did take from those two presentations is we saw two very different areas of fraud there. So when we're talking about staying ahead of fraudsters, we're not talking about fraud in one place or one kind. So I think what we need to do is to start off by just refining and defining what we mean by merchant payments fraud. So, Quintin, I'm going to come to you first for your view on that, please. What falls under the term?
Thank you for the question. There's 100 different ways, and I think we heard in the earlier presentations as well about all these various attacks and attack vectors. But ultimately, every time a merchant ships the goods or delivers something digitally and does not get paid for it for whatever the reason is, friendly fraud or a hack or a phishing attack, it's fraud. Full stop. And that makes it very difficult for merchants to manage all these different ways that fraud do occur. And they do need to partner with the right partners. I mean, this is ultimately what is needed.
Sure. Narco, would you like to expand?
I would also add that it also depends on the type of the merchant. So a merchant that only sells digital goods can have, let's say, different types of fraud than the merchant that ships goods and has a complex procedures behind, because the fraud, I mean, one thing can happen on stealing a card, but also the fraud is a regular order that is received somewhere else to the fraudsters, as Quintin says, then the merchant loses money. And I would still say that I cannot think of a silver bullet that will solve all the frauds, but I would rather say depends on the complexity of the whole process that the merchant has and on the type of the merchant and how it's operating.
Sure. Nathan, you mentioned earlier that fraudsters can also be merchants, vice versa. So you also work with a lot of PSPs and other providers. So what kind of things have you seen that fall under that merchant fraud umbrella, both from merchants being fraudsters and the fraudsters that come into merchants?
Yeah, sure. I think to distinguish between the two, for the sake of this discussion here, the focus really is more on merchant payment fraud. So fraud that impacts the merchants themselves or the consumers who are using the merchant. So I would probably define it by saying what it excludes. And so for the sake of this discussion, excluding merchant-initiated fraud, which is a separate beast, and anything that's kind of an inside job as well. You do see that as well. But so things like chargebacks, service-related fraud, friendly fraud, account takeover, loyalty fraud, refund fraud, anything with a stolen card or stolen credentials. I think that's really where merchants specifically are most vulnerable. And it's constantly changing. You know, you add a payment method, open banking's been growing in Europe, but there's not a centralized standard like they have in China, which is, centrally controlled. So they set the schema. In Europe, you've got 6,000 banks. They're all figuring out their own APIs and own access points. So there's a lot of vulnerability points there. And I have a lot of friends in that space, and they wish they had the rich data that you do with cards to actually combat fraud. So it's always going to change. It's always going to be evolving.
So let's stay on that point about vulnerabilities. And one of the things you mentioned, Nathan, earlier was that fraudsters move like water. And I really like that description because it's very apt. So given that it's always this kind of cat and mouse game of fraudsters getting ahead, us trying to catch up, and then vice versa, what are some of the key tools, techniques, technologies, principles that both merchants and their service providers need to think about when they're trying to tackle fraud?
Yeah, sure. So I'll go in reverse order. So it's principles, techniques, and tools.
Anything that would help, I think.
principles, I think having a holistic approach, so really looking at the payment flow, like mapping it out from beginning to end to see where the vulnerabilities potentially are. A lot of it is at the authentication point. That is a major point of vulnerability. Also working with best-in-class vendors, which Quentin also mentioned. I think that's kind of key. Having analytics, dashboards, analytics, training people really well, making sure you have good people. I think those are the kind of core principles. In terms of techniques, using tokenization, encryption are key, using advanced security, including biometric. I do think that is an area of growth. It has vulnerabilities still. Nothing is perfect, but it is a pretty amazing one. Machine learning, AI, for sure. And then in terms of tools, obviously ours, No, I really think that comes down to what is the main problem that a PSP or a company has. Where is their main point of vulnerability when you go through that process? I'm a big believer, and also where they want to go in 2 years, because you need to be thinking about this now. What is your roadmap? How do you stop vulnerabilities? We see this so often when the company goes into a new region, and the fraud vectors are completely different, or they launch a new product and the existing ways that they've been fighting it are completely gone. And fraudsters probe, but as soon as they find a vulnerability, they will hit you so hard and you can lose millions. So I'm a big believer in problem stack ranking to understand where the value is. So working with your stakeholders, whether you do this with a vendor or on their own, to go, okay, these are the problem statements that I have, and what is the most valuable to solve, and then stack rank those, and then you kind of know what tools you'll need. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
If I may add, I think under the principles, fraud is not a competitive issue. Retailers really do need to work with each other on this point. You see syndicates will hit a specific retailer with a specific kind of fraud. And when this information is shared within the retail community or the merchant community, it really allows the merchants, then other merchants to see what's happening and adapt maybe their transaction flow or their risk parameters to limit that. Second principle, fraud is global. The syndicates are globally based. They're not like bank robbers all sitting in a car and drive up to the bank and rob the bank together. They are dispersed, and that itself makes it very difficult to continuously monitor where it's coming from.
Absolutely. And I apologise, I neglected my duty as moderator to introduce my extra panellists. So, Catherine, I'm going to come to you next, but if you could introduce yourself first, please.
Sure.
Thank you.
My name is Catherine Malik. I'm the General Manager for Assertify in EMEA, and Assertify is a merchant fraud e-commerce prevention platform. So to go to the question, yes, I agree with everything that's been said so far. Obviously, I think, one of the things that is possibly unusual about fraud is that we all basically agree with each other. It's sort of more about how you choose to do it. I would absolutely, from a principles perspective, I think one of the principles that we always need to bear in mind is that fraudsters are fantastically creative. I mean, I hear about things that are, our merchants tell us stories about fraudsters are doing with them, and I'm sitting there thinking, I would never have thought of that myself. These guys are genius. And so we need to be creative in our solutions, and we need to think about how, our merchants get hit with one type of fraud today, it'll be a different type of fraud tomorrow. But the tools that you use to fight the fraud are both kind of iterative and additive. And by that, I mean that, you might fight a particular type of fraud one way, one day, and then you fight something different, slightly differently with a different set of tools tomorrow. But actually, you can then add them together, and then they can help you progress and progress. So don't ever feel like I've got to have one tool for this. That solves one thing will do this. It is how you actually use that power. I would completely agree with the point about the community. One of the things that Assertify is really proud of is that we have an amazing community of merchants, and being in a room with them when they have roundtables is an absolute privilege, because seeing how they discuss the problems that they're seeing, how they're addressing them, what challenges they're facing is absolutely amazing. And that is, aside from the data piece, which is obviously incredibly valuable for machine learning models and helping, make better decisions, that community of sharing common experiences is not to be underestimated.
Yeah, absolutely. Narco, did you have anything to add on that particular question? Okay, we will move on. In that case, we've talked about as different technologies come about, that means different customer journeys, and it also means different opportunities for fraudsters. So when these new customer journeys are coming into play, it has this knock-on effect of fraud types and how those fraudsters operate. I'd like to dig into this a little bit more. Andre, I'm going to come to you first, and please introduce yourself first.
Hi, I'm Andre. I'm from Volkswagen Group Charging. We are in charge of everything which is e-mobility across our brands Audi, Seat, Cupra, Skoda, and Volkswagen himself. And we are not in the car, so no questions about in-car payment. That's the group, that's the manufacturer. But if you are outside of the car and need to charge up, then you are on our solutions.
So we've discussed previously that as a new type of company, new fraud challenges come in as part of your setup for the various different payment solutions. I think it would be really valuable for the audience if you could take us through a couple of those challenges that you have where you have an open door to fraud.
Yeah, we have different challenges in front of us, especially when we're talking about our payment department. I like the idea of merchant-initiated fraud. So in Germany, we have a sentence which means the fish starts to stink on the head, and in that case, the merchant and also we as Volkswagen Group Charging are the head in that case. So many topics are challenging us. So especially when we talked before, in the future, we would like to give our customer the best setup of payments, which means we are subscription-based service. So the customer set up a contract with us and starts to charge on a 3-tariff model. And to find out the best setup for the European region for our customer is to also looking for pan-European payments. One potential payment could be open banking, direct mandate. The problem or the situation in this payment is that we at the moment work with a merchant-initiated transaction. So first situation over the open banking, which could be a potential payment for us, is that I get in touch with the customer, which I don't need because the customer has to accept what I need to capture. Based on the open banking direct mandate is that the customer get the possibility to make a chargeback for the next 180 days, which means 6 months in total. So based on our terms and conditions, we can block the customer after we send out the first dunning 4 weeks later. So in the worst case, we losing 7 months of money, 7 months of energy, and going into a process based on a dunning process, based on a collection process. And that makes the life just a little bit harder for us to find out what could be the right payment first for the customer without any potential open doors to create chargebacks, to create friendly fraud, to create something else. Because in that case, I can't fight this chargeback. I can't fight this fraud. If I get a chargeback for the credit card, I upload an invoice to the PSP backend, everything done, everything defend. But in case of something like open banking or something, if somebody has a solution to solve this situation for me, then we will have a potential third good payment option. But also we have the customer, at the moment, the customer can charge the whole day and we capture in the following months. So that opens the door completely, like enormously open doors for fraudsters to steal our energy and to steal our money. And that's a big problem because of most of the people are working in risk and fraud detection, which is totally fine, concentrating to e-commerce, but that's not our business because the customer comes, makes the onboarding, give us a payment, and in a bad situation, I don't see him for 6 months because he's charging at home with his own EV charger, which he also bought on our side or on our dealer side. But then in the holiday season, he's going to Spain, and then I saw him. And if the credit card then expire, then my capture failed. If the open banking solution expire because of the customer don't remember that he had a contract with me after 6 months because we are no conversation, then I get the next chargeback. And that's not at the moment a big problem, but definitely it will be a big problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great example of how new services and products can find it extremely difficult to navigate this area, and you don't have the benefit necessarily of, back data or looking at history of the customer, that kind of thing. So thank you for sharing that. Catherine, I wanted to come to you because we had a really interesting discussion as well about how it's not just about these new journeys, but how newer technologies can impact existing channels or even the oldest of channels, and we'll see more fraud coming through those. So would you mind elaborating on that?
Sure. So I'm going to take you back in time to remember Moto, mail order, telephone order. So, it was one of those things that when e-commerce really took off, it was sort of, it was like, this is the death of Moto, but it's managed to linger on, in many, many merchants in, smaller to greater or lesser degrees. And it's always been a high fraud channel. But when you combine Moto with SCA had obviously an indirect impact in that now, because e-commerce payment fraud is much has been sort of more reduced because of SCA. The fraudsters have obviously gone to where they can find weak points, and that has included Moto. And then you combine that with some of the new AI capabilities. So I don't know if any of you have looked at Google Duplex, which is a voice AI capability. Snakes alive, those are scary, because if you combine a voice AI technology which can sound like a real human, and then you combine that with a Moto channel which is already high risk, I think we're seeing this really interesting and worrying convergence of new technologies with old channels. So yeah, that's something that we're seeing and that we're hearing from our merchants, that their Moto fraud is is really an area of concern. And for any of you that are, have Moto channels, as well how much of that relies on you having to integrate with your customer operations teams, your call centers, where people don't want to say no to customers. And so it's a very vulnerable channel. And so new AI technologies are very concerning.
I imagine not a channel that they particularly were worried about with when it comes to fraud anymore, and the focus more on e-commerce.
Yeah, there was sort of, again, depending on which vertical you're in. So, particularly verticals like in ticketing and some of those, that was always a big channel for them. But now it's becoming more prevalent for most of our merchants.
Thank you. So I think it's very clear that that merchants are experiencing fraud in different forms at different parts of the journey, and that different techniques and tools are needed to combat that. So I guess there's two parts to the next question: is how do merchants actually start to approach this, and how do they build in agility over time as these techniques and customer journeys continue to evolve? Quintin, I'm going to come to you first.
I think it comes down to the right partnering. Ultimately, I think as much as merchants will have a fraud department, having the right partners that either specialize in one specific aspect of the supply chain, for example, either in the authentication area or, for that matter, in fraud monitoring, they're the experts. They see the trends, and they can help the merchants. So I would say the partnering, without a doubt, is key.
Absolutely. Andre, you're essentially living this experience at the moment of trying to figure out how to put fraud prevention into your customer journey. So how are you approaching it?
I decided to write down each situation which we know at the moment, and I need to go to starting maybe in the future, a short future, some RFP to find the right risk and fraud prevention for us, for our products, for our customer. And in that case, based on the situation I described there, doesn't count if it's B2C or B2B on a dealer side or something else. I need answers to this. And if there is somebody out there and can give me solutions for this situation, then he's highly welcome to be our partner in the next years. That's the easiest part. I can't describe more of instead of our current situation.
Absolutely. Hopefully, some of your co-panelists may be able to help you with that.
Could be. Always the partners outside say, the sales guys say, I can deliver everything. Mm-hmm. In the future, I say, okay, here's the list, and deliver beside to the list. And if you find a solution, then you are welcome as our partner.
That makes sense. Thank you. I'd like to leave a few minutes for questions, so I'm going to just do one very quick fire last question for everybody. What do you see as the next big thing in fraud prevention? Andre, I'm going to come to you first. You can say pass really on that one if you like.
If we're talking about e-commerce, then I can give you a couple of answers. But now I'm making over 10 years e-commerce. Now I'm charging since 1.5 years at Volkswagen, and I think at the moment, I don't see the next big thing in fraud prevention. The biggest thing is that we could catch the wave and be in front of the fraudsters. Thinking about as a fraudster and thinking about the situation where you can be attacked. And if we as the merchants join this position, then we can fight fraud successfully.
Thank you. Quinten.
It's a fantastic question. I would say what I do see becoming relevant is the destination account. So in fraud, in account takeover, or for that matter, in instant payments, being able to know or KYC or monitor the inbound account. So the fraudsters obviously commit the fraud and get into the where the money is. And when they move that to a destination account, that's where you really need to be able to vet these accounts better. And I see that as maybe an emerging technology in a destination account KYC, possibly.
That's interesting. Thank you. Okay.
I also cannot say what's the next big thing. There may be several next big things, and that depends on different types, different use cases. But I would tackle this question from a technical perspective, and I would rather say use a proven standards that are public, that are open, that everybody can see them, at least the engineers, the technical persons that can contribute, that can fix problems, rely on these standards, and you always need to follow the latest technologies or the latest trends. I mean, it's easy to say we are tech motto that is a years old technology with the latest technologies that we have today. But let's try to equalize the attacker and the defender, because we can also tackle the static passwords or break the static passwords from 20 years ago, where you can only use characters from the alphabet with the today's technology, right? That's why we don't use static passwords in the challenge pages.
Thank you. Catherine.
Yes, I would actually kind of agree with that, which, it's how we use AI to fight AI, really.
Yeah.
I like that. That was a real quick fire answer. And Nathan, please, last but not least.
Yeah, so I do think a holistic approach of using things like AI, but biometrics, device, IP, all of this together to try and triangulate. I think bringing that together, so it's not necessarily there is a next big thing. To many people have kind of alluded to this. I think it is doing all the little things that we actually have that so few people have implemented. Like, it's pretty wild how little of the stuff that is available is implemented. And there's cost and there's people's roadmaps, all sorts of reasons why. But I think how you stay ahead of the next big thing is having all the little things that are available today in play, so you're best prepared to be ahead of the next big thing.
That's great advice. Thank you. I'm going to move on to some of the questions now that we've come through Slido. So the first one is about frictionless auth adoption. Who is supposed to onboard customers? What percentage of desktop devices have a fingerprint reader? And what other type of biometrics will be supported? This sounds like a question for either Narco or Quinten. Which one?
I can take this first. Thanks to Matteo. And if you refer to a frictionless authentication to what I was presenting, then I'm flattered, and the Envico should be flattered, because frictionless in our terms is something else. It's like authentication with your hands of the keyboard or of the computer. So this is close to frictionless, if I can say it like this. And I mean, what's the best friction for a card holder? Or I mean, would I be, as a card holder, fine if I don't get any challenge on a website? Maybe I am, maybe I'm not, maybe something's fishy, right? But if I see this challenge, and this challenge is easy enough and it's close to frictionless, then okay, I don't need to fetch my phone or wait for SMS. I'm still assured that I'm challenged. Okay, it's secure enough. It's not, where's my money, right? But I'm authenticated without much problems. But to your question, so this is based on a FIDO credential that is stored on a device. And the biometric authentication is performed by the device. So it depends what kind of biometric the device has. I mean, I don't know really a percentage how many laptops have a fingerprint reader or a camera scanner. So if tomorrow there is a device that would base their biometrics on camera, like the iPhones, they have, the Androids have, they do face recognition, then on Android phone, this would work with the face recognition. There was another part, now the question is gone, but I don't know, cannot recall. Yeah, the onboarding. Yeah, exactly. So the onboarding is on the issuer side. That's one way on how to onboard. So the one that issued the card should onboard the card holder, because, I mean, during the authentication, during the 3DS, the issuer is the one that should authenticate. So the issuer onboards, like in the early days, they gave you a password or let you type a password, set a password. And during the 3DS, you were supposed to type this password again. So the issuer knows that you are you. Now, in this case, the issuer is the one that stores the credential through the portal, through the device. And during the 3DS flow, this challenge or this signature from the credential goes back to the issuer for verification. So it's the issuing bank. That's one way of enrollment.
And ideally not during the transaction. You know, so what you're going to expect here is that the issuer will have some kind of mobile banking app, you know, where you can see your transactions and your balance and that. And that's the area where you want to get the issuer to register the user biometrically, so that when he goes and does his first transaction and that merchant is FIDO enabled biometric, it happens seamlessly.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I apologise, we've run out of time for any further questions, but hopefully the panel will be willing to stay behind if any of you who have put these questions through would like to pose them directly. I'd just like to thank all the panellists and presenters again for giving us your time and your insights today. If any of you want to hear more about fraud and risk management strategies, there's another session in the Potsdam room at 3 p.m, so please join us there. And thank you once again.
Thanks for tuning in to the official MPE podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the show and check other video interviews with other industry leaders on our YouTube channel. For more content, follow Merchant Payments Ecosystem on LinkedIn and Twitter. Don't miss out on our Positivity magazine, and remember to subscribe to the MPE newsletter at www.merchantpaymentsecosystem.com.